Hello everyone, welcome back to part 2 of where I will attempt to convert this Polaroid I-2 to use a removable lithium-ion battery so that it is user replaceable and so that in the future you don't have to disassemble the entire camera just to swap the battery. Now, a few updates since last time. First, I wanted to talk about the clip that was used on the side of the PCB right here. I have the end of the clip here, and in the last video I said that this clip was very, very difficult to remove, and that I actually snapped the clip trying to remove it. Now, upon further review of the instructions, it seems that this was at least partly my fault. See, this is a type of connector that I've never seen before. I have simply never come across it in all my years of diving into electronic stuff. And basically the way this clip is designed to work, it pushes down onto its clip instead of, like every other plug known to man, pushing in. It goes down and onto the pins instead of pushing into them, if that makes sense. Now, that wasn't completely clear from the instructions until you sort of scrolled over a few of the images, which, because I was viewing it on my phone, wasn't completely apparent at the time. But regardless, although I'm giving Polaroid a little bit of credit for that because, yes, I removed it wrong, the fact of the matter still stands that they really should have just used a more standard connector. As I discussed in the last video, as far as I can tell, the only reason for this battery to have 5 wires in the first place is because the wires are very thin and thus can only carry so much current. And so they've doubled up on the positive and the negative in order to have gone into this 5-pin design, which then attaches to the PCB. Now, in trying to remove the plug from the PCB, as I said, I snapped it. But what's crazier than that, when I went to reattach this plug, you can see here where I've put some heat shrink at the end, and that's because I tried to adapt this plug to form this little extension lead that I've created. And what ended up happening as I went to reattach the plug to the PCB, the plug, because of the force required even just to push it back onto the pins the correct way, the force of me doing so, and I'm being pretty careful here because this is the first time I've been inside this thing, the force of doing so removed the entire little socket straight off the pads. Now, it didn't rip any traces. The pads were all still sitting there on the board. It's like the solder was such poor quality that the slightest amount of force just straight up sheared it straight from the PCB, which was insane to me. So what I've actually done, and I might swing my lamp around here and just take a photo on my phone, and then hopefully I'll remember to actually upload this photo from my phone. But what I've done instead is I've soldered the wires directly to the PCB now. Because when I took the plug off, it left behind the corresponding pads for the pins. So basically there's 1, 2, 3, 4, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pads, right, on the PCB. And what I did was basically bridge these two and solder in the white wire, the black wire, and the red wire. So the black and the red both attached to 2 pads. The white wire is just going to the thermistor, I believe, so it doesn't need to be particularly thick, so I used a thinner gauge of wire for that, the same that I use in my polar volt conversions. But for the red and the black wires, I just used standard, like, battery box wire that comes with, like, you know, AAA and AA battery holders. It's, I don't know, twice as thick as the stock gauge that's on the original battery supplied. And yeah, so that's what I ended up doing. Now, what I'm going to end up doing, you guys might remember that I broke off those little lugs down the bottom there, which was used for routing the cables. What I'm going to do to act as strain relief, I've cut myself this little rectangle of plastic and I'm basically going to put that over the wires, and at the top I'm going to drill a hole and add a screw so that this little black rectangular plastic piece, see if I can make that a bit more obvious, that's going to act as strain relief. So basically once that's on the board, this can no longer budge. At the other end of the wires that go from the PCB, I've put a JST socket. So this is a 3-pin JST socket, and I've wired the corresponding side to the battery. So this is now easy to plug in. What I'll probably do is, just using a knife, I'll detach some of the barbs that really secure it, because JST connectors have little like locking tabs that help basically keep the holder from falling out. But I don't see that happening anytime soon, so I don't think it needs to be as strong as it is designed here, and I want it to be more easily removable, so I'll likely just snip off those little tabs. But yeah, my plan so far, having hardwired brand new thicker gauge wires directly to the PCB, is to route all the wires, add this little rectangle of black plastic that I cut up from some other random plastic parts that I had, secure that with a screw for strain relief so that you can't pull the wires straight off the PCB. And yeah, basically I've made the extension cords so that once the battery sits in here, like so, there should be just enough room to kind of fold this bit over and tuck it in over the battery door. Because there's actually, when you put on the body panel, there is actually quite a lot of room at the front of the camera. And I want to talk a bit about battery position here in just a second, because there's really two ways that I think the factory could have gone about this. Now, the method that I'm going to choose is to put a door on the side. I'm going to do that because it's going to be the easiest. But as you can see, there's actually ample room for the battery to sit plus the plugs. So it shouldn't be an issue. I think it's going to be a bit of a tight fit, but it shouldn't be a problem. The other thing I've gone ahead and done is the wires that go to the motor, I've also added a little bit of plastic here as well, just to basically butt up against where the pos and neg of the motor are. Now, where am I getting all this plastic from, you might ask? Well, old I-type film packets. I just cut it up with scissors into the correct shape, and this little plastic piece can now literally just sit in front of the motor like so. Right, I'll show you again. Just so that when you do insert the battery, it's got something to butt up against. Now, on the subject of battery position, what I noticed after taking apart the camera is if we flip this thing over, this panel here, this black plastic panel, really does nothing. It's about the same size as the battery, and if Polaroid was to have designed a little trap door here, you could have actually had access to the battery internally, because there's a lot of space here. So the door could have gone in here as well. So that would have been another way to design it. It would have involved making the chassis a little bit differently, but I could have cut this out myself, either using a Dremel or a hot blade or something like that. But I think just for the sake of keeping it simple, I'm going to cut a notch out of the door roughly the same size as the battery. So I'll probably go, I mean, what are the dimensions on this? I mean, the battery's 2 centimeters wide and 1 centimeter high. So I'll probably go like just beyond 2 centimeters and maybe 15 mil high in order to make this door. But yeah, that's basically the plan at this moment. And yeah, as I said, in the meantime, I did end up finding spare batteries. Someone left in the comments below, they said, do you know that these batteries are generally named via their dimensions? And yes, that is certainly true. Although when the dimensions start to get below 10 millimeters, the naming convention sort of stops kind of making sense. But basically, if you want to figure out what these batteries are named, you just kind of find the thicknesses. So this is 1 centimeter by 2 centimeters by 4.5. So basically 10 mil by 20 mil by 45. And so that would make this battery a 10, 20, 45. And that's basically how they name them. However, it's not quite that simple. As I said, this battery has the extra wire that runs into the center pin here. And that wire will either be for something to do with the board management system, or more likely it is a thermistor that basically will stop the battery from charging if it gets too hot. And that makes finding a new OEM battery replacement a little bit more difficult. Now, I have found some that are the same size. A recurring theme that I'm coming across in my search for Polaroid batteries is for the physical dimensions of the batteries that Polaroid use, the amount of milliamp hours that Polaroid's batteries are rated for is always seemingly like 100, 150 more than every other battery in existence. So this means either two things are happening here. Number one, whoever is supplying batteries for Polaroid is just fudging the numbers, and realistically they're actually lower in terms of milliamp per hour. Or two, Polaroid is having them produced to a insanely high spec with the best possible quality of lithium ion ever made by man. But I did manage to find some replacement battery cells identical to this, so some 10, 20, 45s. When you search for them online, like AliExpress and that kind of stuff, I found the best thing to search for was the model of the battery and then thermistor. All right, because that will get you the 3-wire design instead of just the 2 wires. And I believe that thermistor is going to be necessary for this thing to actually charge the battery. It's going to need to register something on the PCB. What was I going to say? Yeah, I believe the way that a thermistor works is it's basically like a resistor. And the hotter it gets, I think the resistance decreases. Or it might increase. I don't know. The resistance changes based on heat. So if this really starts to heat up, the resistance alters, and if the board picks up that the resistance has altered, it ceases charging. Now, I could fudge that by basically connecting the white wire to a resistor and then back to ground, but that would be dangerous because USB-C is capable of fast charging, and if a battery got too hot, like you were fast charging it on a hot day, it could explode or catch fire or something like that. Not fun. So yeah, when you search for a replacement battery, you got to include the word thermistor. That'll get you the 3-wire variant. Unfortunately, all the ones that I found do not include the JST connector. So although it's an off-the-shelf generic replacement, it will need to be slightly altered. Well, not altered, but you'll just need to DIY your own JST connector. Now, I still see that as a far easier thing to do than completely disassembling the camera, but that's the only caveat that I found so far in terms of a generic battery replacement for this. So basically what I'm going to do now, off camera, I'm going to cut out the door. A lot of you have asked, can I like recycle the little bit of plastic so that it looks the same? I'm not going to be doing that. I'm going to cut an aluminium panel that's bigger. The reason being is that this is quite a thick piece of plastic, and I would just simply like the extra real estate that extra 2 or 3 mil is going to give me. And the panel I'll sort of make fit around so it's bigger, and then I can, write my branding on the side of the panel. Very, very similar to what I did in my last camera that I showed off, where I basically oversized an aluminium panel. I held it on by 2 holes. It's going to keep these 2 cameras looking aesthetically very similar. And I think that the Frankensteining that little aluminium panel on an otherwise black camera is really going to emphasize that, yes, this has been modified, and it's going to highlight the crap design that this had originally. So that's why I'm choosing to do it like that. There is a reason for it. But yeah, first thing I got to do, neaten up where I broke off those clips, add some strain relief, and then yeah, basically cut this. I think I'll get to the stage where I have the camera assembled, and then I will add the aluminium door last, once I can size everything up and know sort of how big it's supposed to be. Wish me luck. The other thing that I would like to point out is the lens assembly butts completely up to this square cutout. And internally, this entire film chamber is completely and utterly lightproof. One of the biggest criticisms that I got when I pointed out the I-2 battery issue is everyone that was simping for Polaroid was like, oh yeah, but if you're if you put a battery door in, it'll decrease the structural rigidity and you'll add light leaks. No, you won't. Don't be freaking ridiculous. This thing is entirely sealed inside. All box-type cameras are. You could punch as many holes into the outside casing as you wanted to, and it's not going to leak light. And it's not even going to affect the electric eye, because that's baked into the lens assembly as well. Now, in terms of structural rigidity, this is as rigid as it was before, because this plastic inside is really reinforced. Even with this cutout, it's strong as an ox. So there's no excuse for this. It's as simple as that. There just isn't an excuse. You don't need to defend Polaroid for this. It's a bad design. Anyway, I'm going to neaten this up with a file, since it's a little bit messy from where I was cutting with the Dremel, but honestly, it doesn't look like it needs that much neatening up. So, back to the fast forward, I guess. All right, now I'm gonna go off camera, do some drilling and add that little strain relief. I'll be right back. Alrighty, strain relief is in. I cut a very small little rectangle of plastic. I drilled a hole straight into the body, into the light chamber, and basically just added a screw so that instead of those little loops that were holding the wire down, I now have a little removable piece. It turned out this probably wasn't super necessary anyway. I was very afraid about the possibility, since there's no clip there anymore and I had to hardwire directly to the PCB. I was very worried about the possibility of tugging on the little extension lead that I made and ripping the traces straight off the PCB. However, when the lens element is actually put into place, it does a really good job of holding in everything anyway, but there's an extra layer of redundancy and protection in there now. I also just wanted to add, I forgot to mention as well, that where I had my pads, there's actually a probe point for the battery right next to the red wire. And I basically blobbed solder so that positive has pins 4, 5, and the probe point, all providing contact for positive battery power. I just wanted to add that because I saw that it was there and decided that it would be great to tap into that as well, just again as a bit of extra redundancy. So that means that it is time to reassemble this thing, and honestly the hardest part about this is very likely going to be figuring out what screws go where, because some of them are long and some are short. This is the remains, by the way, of the little socket that just straight up lifted from the PCB. Like I said, it didn't lift any pads from the PCB. The solder just completely gave way, so awesome quality. But I'm glad it didn't lift any pads because it gave me the possibility to solder directly to it. So yeah, now I gotta put this thing back together. I might consult the guide. I'm pretty sure that wherever there are like longer posts, It's the long screws that hold it together. But I think I'll just consult the guide just to make sure. And I might try and do a little another fast forward type thing. All right, we are reassembled. I believe everything is put back together properly. I haven't tried putting the battery in yet, but I just wanted to power it up externally to see if everything's going to work. I ended up having to take this thing apart because I forgot the metal rod that latches the door, which was annoying. I had to completely dismantle it and put it back together, but it is back together now. And yeah, I basically just want to chuck a battery in. We'll chuck an empty pack of film in. Ooh, that sounds promising. Sounds like it's coming to life. What do we got? Aperture, shutter, manual, timer, auto. Wow. Okay, it seems to be working. That's great. I'm just gonna, I guess, experiment with how to slot the battery back in. I guess like so. And then maybe I can, yeah, like that. Perfect. There we go. Well, there you are. All I have to do now is, using a little piece of aluminium, basically cut up and make a door. I'll drill some holes, add some screws, and we'll be in business. All right, guys. Well, there we have it. Another project that can be filed under things I'd rather never have to do ever again. I wanted to now basically just, I guess, off the top of my head, go through, I guess, what I've done, like as a bit of a finale, and then follow up on a few thoughts. But basically what I've done, as you guys can see before, is I've added a little battery door. All you have to do to access the battery now is loosen up the rear screw. And you can take it out if you want. You can slide the battery door forwards, and then that gives you access to the battery internally. It also, the hole actually becomes larger if you then open the door as well. Now, I do find that you kind of have to fish the wires out. Again, this whole extension cable business that I've made is not a perfect solution. What I would love to do ideally is have like a hard cell battery solution, like a AAA size thing or something like that. Because certainly, like my polar volt users, there's certainly room for two 3.7 volt, 320 milliamp hour cells. And I'm actually sure that would power the camera pretty reasonably well, but I'll make do with what I've got. Being that it's designed to take a pouch cell, and being that, you know, unless I really designed the camera from the get-go to use, you know, hard cells, like I'd need to add terminals and that kind of stuff inside. So I would prefer to use a hard cell, but the soft cell pouches are going to work just fine. But yeah, it's just a matter of kind of dropping it in like so. Oh, one thing that I did, the cables that hold the LiDAR assembly, I actually taped them to the roof of the assembly using some automotive grade adhesive, just so that you couldn't accidentally get them all tangled. But yeah, the battery basically just unclips. I did remove some of the little internal barbs on the socket so that JST connectors now aren't so difficult to pull on and off. So it's going to make battery replacement in the future just that even more easy than it was already. But yeah, basically you just slide the battery in like so. And yeah, I find you just push the little socket over to the side like so. And yeah, you can just kind of tuck the cables in, and away you go. You can then put the battery door back on. In terms of the construction of the camera, I said this in some other videos that I did about Polaroid I-type. I actually said it before I even opened up the camera in my video where I reacted to the official iFixit guide, where I questioned the use of having just so many clips when there were so many screws that hold the camera together. And in my mind, like I said, I'm not an official engineer, or I'm not a designer of any kind. I just kind of have common sense. If you're using screws to assemble something, you probably don't need clips. And if you're using clips to assemble something, you probably don't need screws. I genuinely think you could delete half the clips in this camera and it's still going to be held together just as well. For example, I ended up actually just removing one of the bottom clips from either side of the sloped rear panel just to make it that much easier to take apart. I did end up deleting all the little clips from the bottom as well, because it's held in place with the 2 screws. And that's when I realized that pretty much those 3 clips that are so difficult to take off, I genuinely don't think they need to exist. There's 2 lugs that hold this part on, and at the back, because that entire 3-clip system, it can't be pulled up because of the viewfinder. It has to be removed, sliding it to the rear. And, well, you can't do that because it's got those 2 screws. So because of those 2 screws, it renders basically everything else totally moot other than the 2 clips at the top there. Literally, all you need is like 2 plastic lugs, and probably I would, that 3rd clip that was in the center, if I was engineering this, I'd get rid of that and put 1, 2, 3 screws to hold that panel on. Because once those screws are in the rear, you can't physically slide it off. So all you need is like a little lipped channel down the either side just to hold the panels over one another. 1, 2, 3 screws would be super strong. Keep the 2 lugs at the front because they're useful. And that's it. That's all you'd need to do. Instead, getting into this thing, like, look at the damage I've had to cause on the side here, on that rubberized piece, just mangling the panel because I just could not get those clips out. It was so difficult. You kind of have to like lift up on the rubber and then go underneath. Similarly for this top panel that's branded Polaroid, it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, I think like 5 clips on either side. Or 10 clips total, something like that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I think it's got 8 clips total and 2 screws that hold it in. All you would need to do is have clips at the front and then use the screws and hinge the whole thing, and it's going to be held in place just as well. Like, there's so much assembly required in this thing that I think is totally redundant. Like, I'm pretty sure I could put it together without screws. But yeah, it's just not well designed inside. Like, and I say this as someone that fixes the SX70 like every single day. That has its own quirky bits of design, but like none of it is like as balls to the wall, frustrating for no reason as the I-2 is. Like, there's just so much stuff where I'm like, why am I having to unclip this to do this? Same goes for the little strain relief clips that are next to the motor that bunch all those wires together. So difficult to remove anything. It was much nicer for me to just put that little plastic panel in with a screw that I could take off if I wanted to do cable management there. So that was another easy little option. Yeah, just so much questionable design choices. But the camera, I am happy to say, does work. Ta-da! In fact, it's even exposing pretty well. Like, it didn't overexpose any of the photos, and I've had it just set to the middle. So it could be that after after the trauma of surgery, the I-2 has just decided that the auto exposure is going to be accurate before I rip it apart again. Truthfully, I don't know. The shots that I've gotten so far have all been spot on, even on auto, which was not my experience the last time shooting an I-2. So I can't really, I don't know if that's just luck or coincidence or whatever. But yeah, ultimately, the reason that I'm doing this video, and I hope that you've stayed for the end part here, as of the time of me making this, I don't know if this is something I want to offer as a service, really. Simply because my time is money, and this was a huge, time-consuming pain in my anus to do. The reason that I did this was really to prove a point, because on my Instagram, when I announced my criticisms, I guess, of the I-2, because it still didn't have a user-replaceable battery, I was met with an admittedly small minority of commenters that were just absolutely simping for Polaroid, coming up with all kinds of excuses as to why the internal battery was fine, or, oh, if they made it user replaceable, it would be too expensive, or it would compromise the camera's structure, or it would introduce possibility for light leaks, or like there's just so many rubbish excuses that are just like that could not stand up to like 3 seconds of critical thinking. And I really just wanted to do this to prove a point that yes, it's possible. This isn't even a good solution. This is a hack solution done by a guy working out of a bedroom to prove a point. Imagine if this thing was designed properly from the start. Like I said before, you've got 2 options of where you could easily mount that battery. There's this plastic panel, which could be removable with ease, or you've got that little side access point, which again would be very easy to remove. In fact, you could even remove the entire plastic side, really. I mean, there's no excuse why this entire panel shouldn't be able to come off. There's nothing really under there but the flash capacitor and chunks of the viewfinder, but you could easily come up with a little shield for that. And all it does is demonstrate that from the get-go, repairability and future-proofing just must not have been a priority at all. That's all getting inside this thing demonstrates. Even down to the strange battery connector that's inside. Like I said, it had 5 wires, the only reason of which was seemingly so that more current could go through the wires, which wouldn't be a problem if they just used a normal connector and regular sized wires. So it's like they invented a problem to solve a problem that didn't really solve a problem. Like, it's just, I just don't understand why they had to make like everything about it just so difficult. Like, the battery has a strange connector. You can't buy it off the shelf. The internals need to be completely disassembled to access the connector. Like, there's so much stuff that doesn't make sense. I mean, there's no reason that they couldn't have had like a little daughter board there with a JST connector that you plug the battery into, like on the side. There's room, like underneath this panel, there's like a void of like a centimeter doing nothing. So they could have ran power from the PCB to a separate daughter board to plug in a battery. Like just to make it so that you didn't need to take the viewfinder. And, you know, I understand maybe taking the body panels off, but the fact you have to take the viewfinder off and the LiDAR off and the lens assembly off, that's ridiculous. You know, like, in my other I-type videos, I talked about how, like, for example, the Impossible Project I-1, it's not that easy. I mean, it's not that difficult to take apart because it's only 2 screws on the door. Well, here it's like the entire camera that has to be disassembled. On my other camera, the One Step 2, this is also like has a battery in a very similar position, but it's not super difficult to take apart because it's like, I think 10 screws to get inside to that location. And the battery is a lot more of a standard design. The I-2, it's like, there's so many extra layers of difficulty added for no reason that I can think of. And in order to fix all those issues that I discovered, like it couldn't have added very much to the total cost of production of this camera. Like, we're talking maybe dollars or cents per unit in order to rectify those things. Now, the last thing that I wanted to comment on, I do realize that I did make a mistake in my last video. In my last video, I said that there was no, like, it told you that this front panel was clipped on and actually it was screws. Well, if you read one of the sub-bullet points of, like, one of the steps that's like 10 steps earlier, it does actually tell you to remove 2 screws, but it's not very clear. Again, you have to really scroll through pictures and really read the description. It's easy to get lost in 62 steps is what I'm trying to say. And even though that was my bad, and I obviously discovered the problem and it was pretty easy to take 2 screws out, the main point still stands that you shouldn't need to do all this to take a battery out. Like, that's it. End of story. End of discussion. Like, you shouldn't need to dismantle. Imagine if you had to dismantle an entire car and take the engine out to get to the battery. Like, it's just silly, and I won't stand for it. But yeah, other than a few little mistakes, which were my fault and are, you know, it's honestly to be expected when you take apart something for the first time and you're not familiar with how it's supposed to be inside, your odds of damaging something go up a lot. even if you happen to have a manual in front of you. Because it's one thing to look at a picture and one thing to actually get the tactile motor memory that's required to, you know, successfully repair something over and over and over. But yeah, I think that's really all I wanted to say. It's totally doable, totally possible. Don't let anyone else tell you otherwise. And yeah, this thing just straight up works really well. Like, it hasn't thrown me any error messages or anything like that. It's been exposing well. And now that I know it's not just going to spontaneously die in a few years, I kind of like it a lot better. It's a much more forgivable camera now that I know I can swap the battery out at my leisure. Now, I probably will do one follow-up video to this where I want to try and, using a generic AliExpress battery, make an entirely spare cell and then install it and just see whether or not the camera will run off generic battery cells, because it's one thing to make the battery user replaceable, it's another thing to then be able to access those batteries. Because, you know, Polaroid could all of a sudden decide they don't want to sell spare parts for the I-2 anymore, and that strange proprietary battery might disappear off the shelves. So it would be nice to know that there are drop-in replacements available. So that will be the final part in this video. It'll be a pretty short video, and yeah, stay tuned for that one. As always, if you like this kind of content and you want to see more, please remember to like and subscribe. And yeah, if you think this is cool and you want to leave a donation, links are below to where you can donate to the channel. Alternatively, send something in my way to get repaired. You've been a wonderful audience, and I will see you next time.